We're back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast on a Friday, the end of January, January 31st today, already getting closer to the Super Bowl, about 9 days away now, if my math is correct. So we're just getting closer and closer to the big game. But in the meantime, we got to discuss some other things, right? It's almost draft season. Are we already in draft season? I can never really tell when, we start actually labeling it draft season, right? Because the Senior Bowl is already kind of getting underway. The Shrine Bowl also just kind of concluded as well, and there's already mock drafts coming out and things like that. So I guess we could be in draft season, right? It feels still a little bit too early for me, but in regards to the NFL draft and this segment, right, and the New York Giants, to talk about them here for a little bit. Looking at their outlook for this year's upcoming draft, last year they picked at number 6, and this year didn't go too well, obviously, for a bunch of different reasons, and they dropped 3 more spots. Now they're picking at number 3 this year, and the focus starts turning to that draft and looking at some of the best players in the country coming from college that are going to be right at the fingertips for the Giants to select when we get into April. And General Manager Joe Schoen knows that, obviously, so he's keeping an open mind to all the different options that he is going to have at number 3, right? When you got guys like Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, all these different guys, right? 4 guys there, 3 picks up until the Giants. So they're going to end up with somebody, and that's something that General Manager Joe Schoen is pretty excited about, and still not giving out too many specifics on where his mind is right now, because he said, we're going to be open to anything. We're in a good position sitting at 3 with the players that are available. So by process of elimination, we know we're going to get a good player. Pretty basic stuff there, right, as an opening sort of sentiment at the Senior Bowl during this week, where Joe Schoen gave this statement. And already, you could obviously admit that he's right, because you got tons of guys that you can pick for, and you really can't go wrong with any of them, honestly. I guess, now that I say that, not that Abdul Carter is wrong or anything like that, because he's a tremendous player, but I don't know if that's a major need for the Giants right now, having, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence already there on their defensive line. I don't know if adding Abdul Carter is a must-have for the Giants, but you can't go wrong with Travis Hunter and obviously the 2 quarterbacks, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. Someone will be there, even if somebody trades up ahead of the Giants and they stick to what General Manager Joe Schoen is saying. They're still going to have a good range of players to select from. If, say, the Raiders trade up and go to number 2 with the Browns, they take a quarterback. All right, well, if they do take both of them, Cam goes number 1 and Shedeur goes number 2 or something like that, then the Giants can have Travis Hunter, which is not a bad option to be left with at all, or vice versa with any of the other guys. So I think, yes, Joe Schoen is correct. He has a bunch of options to go with, and he'd be all right with any of them, right? Like I said before, but anybody knows around the Giants and what their major issue is the quarterback, right? Hence the question, do the Giants have to draft a quarterback at number 3, right? Joe Schoen can say that they could draft a good player regardless of who it is, right? And he's not wrong. But in this spot, when you have an opportunity this prosperous at number 3, I would say, you got to take advantage of it, because you ideally don't want to be picking top 3 every year, right? So you don't know ideally when you would ever be picking this high, right? Hopefully next year they're not back here again. So you got to take advantage of it, and your biggest need is sitting right there at your fingertips. So for as open and as I guess just pretty easy going with this decision for right now in Joe Schoen, I think you got to lock in on your major issue at hand, your major position of need, because, in this day and age, obviously with the quarterbacks and things in the NFL, you're not really moving anywhere in terms of progression or anything like that when you don't have the guy. And a lot of franchises have struggled with finding the franchise guy. Only a handful of teams really have a transcendent talent at that spot. And you always see them each and every year at this point of the year, right? In January and in February, playing up until this point, it's no surprise that all these guys have the top tier guys at quarterback. And, it's very hard to find a guy like that, right? The Giants have that experience of struggling. You look at the Steelers elsewhere, the Browns, again, another team that's picking in the top three, still trying to figure out their quarterback position. So, right now, from what I've seen, a lot of news and content, around social media and just reports you see, have Shedeur Sanders heavily linked to the New York Giants, which is, I think, too obvious to pass up for a couple reasons, and a lot of options to consider, because I believe this is the offseason for the Giants to get it right. And with you already being linked to Shedeur Sanders, and like I said, it brings me to this point where I'm thinking that this is like the main offseason for Joe Schoen, I really should say, and Brian Daboll, and the Giants overall, because really after last season and what we saw with Hard Knocks and the whole Saquon situation, right, it's kind of hard to, get over something like that, right, because Saquon's playing in the Super Bowl in like 9 days. But after a season like that and making a decision like that, we all heard Hard Knocks, how John Mara said he was going to have trouble sleeping. To be back, and I didn't think both of them would be back to start another whole offseason, but they got another chance to kind of make up for that. So that's why I think there's a lot more pressure and a lot more attention on this offseason for both of them. So you at least have to get the first pick right? At number 3, you're going to have a great player, like Joe Schoen said, but you got to make sure he makes the difference for you, not just be like a secondary player that's just on the roster, but isn't really a catalyst for changing the course of a game or anything like that, right? So I think Shedeur right now has been the one linked most to them, and I think that would be the best fit, right? Shedeur in New York, the media attention and everything like that, he could have a possibility of going in there, playing pretty good, and not only building the excitement for the fans and things like that, and really taking over that franchise as his if he plays well. But if you look at a bigger picture in the NFC, I've said it before, I'm pretty sure on the show, how I don't really think that there's like a handful of guys that you would deem like unbeatable top tier quarterbacks in the NFC. All of them are in the AFC, right? Obviously, with Patrick being the main one, but in the NFC, right, I think there's a reason why a rookie quarterback made it to the NFC Championship game and basically carrying his team, right? Because I think he's that special, obviously, to his own merit. But in the NFC, there's not a lot of, just unbeatable final boss kind of quarterbacks, right? To use that analogy. You don't really have that, right? Like Jordan Love's a great quarterback, Matthew Stafford, Hall of Fame quarterback for me, and he's also been considered top 7, top 6 quarterback now. Jalen Hurts obviously also in there. Dak, depending on where you stand on him. Sam Darnold played a great year, but he's probably not top 10 or anything like that. So there's really not a whole bunch of guys to pick from. Baker Mayfield, another one. You don't really have a lot of like the top 5, top 4 guys. So if Shedeur's able to come into New York, play pretty well, and take over that city with all the excitement that he's generated and the hope, really, from his play, I think it's too obvious of a decision to pass up on. You can be neutral about it right now because we're still very early, but I think the Giants have this opportunity in front of them, and I don't think they could pass it up just because, there's a bunch of guys to choose from, and you don't want to show your hand, obviously, too early. But Shedeur could have a possibility, if he is drafted by New York, to go in there and really take over and have an opportunity to go in there, battle against these top guys, and maybe surprise a lot of people, right? You just never know. Nobody expected the Commanders to be where they are right now, and I know as a roster probably have a bit more on their roster than the Giants, right? Because the Giants, they, for as much as we kind of poke fun at them, they have good players like Malik Neighbors, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Tyrone Tracy looked pretty decent as well. They got some guys, right? It's not that far off from the Commanders, right? So I'm not sitting here and like predicting anything if they get Shedeur that they're going to be in the divisional round of the playoffs, but I don't think it's a impossible task to be in and around the playoff picture and be a dangerous team that maybe a lot of people don't want to face if you get hot at the right time, you know? That's where I want this thing to go for the Giants. I think they have an opportunity to do that, but of course, you know, we can get into the discussion of Shedeur versus Cam, or like another option, you could potentially even trade out of number 3 and sign someone like Sam Darnold if they feel like that's their best option, and fill out your roster a little bit more with the picks that you get back for trading down from the number 3 overall pick. That's another scenario where I think it's a little bit too bold for the Giants to do something like that, but you know, it is something out there that you could consider because you still need to improve the offensive line, get some more receivers. I'd like to see some more linebackers, you know, off-ball linebackers there for the Giants as well. So they still need a lot of pieces to add to this whole thing, but they do got the options, right? And I guess that brings us back to what Joe Schoen was saying, right? On the idea of, yes, there's a lot of players, yes, they're in a good spot, and they're open to a lot of different things, right? And it also just falls back onto their evaluation, I guess you could say, on how much they actually like some of these rookie quarterbacks, or do they take a chance on Sam Darnold? And it is a chance, it is a risk, because he just had his best season. So is that enough to give him, I don't know, like $30-40 million for like 3 years or something like that? Probably something around that. Is that something that you're willing to take a risk on? Especially, like I mentioned before, Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, in a situation where, not that we're hoping for it or anything like that, but I think that, you know, their jobs are, their seats are starting to get a little bit hot, right? So that's also something that alters some decisions, right? When you know that you're kind of under a microscope now of potentially losing your job if things don't go well, right? So there's a lot of pressure, obviously. Being in New York brings that naturally, but also after a few years of regression and disappointment, this has to be the year where we see at least a step forward, not 2 steps back if you're the Giants. So a lot riding on this decision, and we're still very early into it, but I think, yes, in a way the Giants have to draft. They need to get a quarterback on their team, right? They need to switch it up there, whether it be Sam, Shedeur, or Cam. I think it has to be one of those 3 as a final answer, you know, to the question on your screen. So that's only one of the many stories that we're probably going to talk about in this draft process. But for right now, we're going to move over to the NFL a little bit more, talking about the Dallas Cowboys and more on their head coaching hire. This time, Dak Prescott had something to say about Brian Schottenheimer, who he has a very good relationship with, and he gave him a little boost of confidence as well. We're going to go into what he said and also talking bigger picture with the Cowboys, just having a look around, you know, the NFC and seeing how things stand with the Cowboys and where they rank in the hierarchy of the NFC as a whole, but also their division. So we'll be right back with that. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your